Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lin, and...
I'm Joe.
So today, Joe, I want to tell you about a haunted hotel.
Okay.
In 1924, so almost 100 years ago, three hoteliers, I don't know what it is. Three guys who build hotels, William Banks Hanner, Charles L. Dix, and Robert H. Shops, built a beautiful 700-room hotel in downtown Los Angeles. They called it the Cecil Hotel. It was planned to be a destination for business travelers and tourists. The three men invested about $2.5 million in the enterprise at that time. That's over $44.6 million in today's economy.
That's a lot.
That is a lot of money. It boasted a fancy marble lobby. It had stained glass windows, potted palms, and alabaster statues. Now, before anyone asks, what's alabaster? I looked it up because I would have thought it would be marble statues, but alabaster is a type of gypsum that is commonly used for stone carvings because it's...
soft?
I imagine it's soft, yeah.
I think it's soft, yeah.
So those guys knew that there were several similar hotels that had been established in the nearby downtown, and they expected the area to boom. But within 5 years of the hotel opening, the United States sank into the Great Depression. So things were not looking so great for the Cecil. So even though it still flourished as a fashionable destination throughout the 1940s, later decades, it didn't do so good, and it started to decline. The area nearby was known as Skid Row. We've all heard of Skid Row. In fact, it's kind of like you say, oh, they're from Skid Row, even though they're not from L.A. It's just kind of means a place where drunks and prostitutes...
So wasn't like that before, like while the hotel was being built?
No, it was a popular area.
Wow.
So I would guess that... maybe because of the Depression, maybe just because as a city grows, the inner city then becomes less nice and kind of falls into disrepair. So that Skid Row area became increasingly populated with unhoused people and transients. As many as 10,000 homeless people live within a 4-mile radius of the Cecil Hotel. 10,000.
Have you seen like the videos and the pictures, like Los Angeles?
Yeah.
There'll be like entire neighborhoods that are just like a tent city.
Yeah. I can't remember where it is. It's somewhere in California. There's a street, a road that is just lined with derelict vehicles. They're obviously not moving, and people live in those vehicles. It's just a line of cars parked.
Sad.
Yeah. So the Cecil became a notorious rendezvous spot for adulterous couples, drug activity, and it was kind of like ground zero for prostitutes, which makes sense because it's in the middle of Skid Row and it's, just not a very nice place. But from the very beginning, the Cecil was kind of paranormally controversial.
Why?
In fact, by 2008, it was referred to as the Suicide. Instead of the Cecil, the Suicide.
Because people would commit suicide?
Yes, a lot of people. Now, keep in mind, they started building that hotel in 1924. On November 19th, 1931, Manhattan Beach resident W.K. Norton was found dead in his room after ingesting poison capsules. Poison capsules? This sounds hideous. What was it, cyanide? Couldn't find any details on it. But they found the poison. They found poison capsules in his pocket after his body was found, and he had the signs of having been poisoned. So maybe they didn't have the capabilities of determining, what chemicals are in a body. At that time, I don't know.
They couldn't determine what killed him or what chemicals?
They knew he was poisoned, and he had poison capsules in his pocket. but nothing that I saw told what the poison was in the capsules.
Weird.
So I don't know.
It's like cyanide's really easy to detect.
You would think. Yeah, there's
like by autopsy, by appearance of the dead person.
The scent of it, everything.
Yeah, it's really easy to smell.
So Norton had checked into the hotel a week before he died under the name James Willies, I think it is, from Chicago. Why he checked in under a pseudonym? No idea. Apparently he did not leave a note, but it appeared to be self-inflicted. And then in September of 1932, a maid found a guy named Benjamin Dodich dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He didn't leave a suicide note either.
So let's say you moved the Cecil Hotel to somewhere else. Like you just slid it across town. Would that affect the suicide rates?
I don't know.
I mean, the suicide rates in the hotel.
At this time, it had not fallen into its poverty-stricken ways. It was still flourishing. It flourished till the 1940s. So in 1934...
Well, so maybe there's a relationship for why that place became so bad, that area, and the hotel there was a lot of suicides in the hotel.
Oh, that's the point.
I like, you said paranormal, whatever. The implication here is the suicides weren't.
Well, my implication is, I didn't see anybody else, officially making that connection. But my implication is, well, come on. You got a place here. It's a nice hotel. It's got frickin' statues in the lobby, palm trees, stained glass windows, and people go there, check in, and kill themselves. That just seems...
I wonder what the suicide rates are proportionally when you adjust for, like, how much the hotel costs. So, like, are hotels that are really high-end, do they have more suicides than low-end hotels?
That is interesting. That would
proportionally
be something to check out.
How many people actually go there.
That would be interesting. On July 26, 1934, former Army Medical Corps Sergeant Louis D. Borden was found dead in his room at the Cecil. He'd slashed his own throat with a razor.
Ouch.
Some of these don't really sound like typical ways you'd kill yourself, Yeah,
what is it? It's men mostly kill themselves with guns, and women typically use medication and chemicals.
Yeah. And this guy did leave several notes. One of them cited his poor health as a reason for his suicide. But to slash your throat with your own throat with a razor?
What? So it's funny because, like, especially in Los Angeles, I believe, de facto standard suicide method is jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
no, that's San Francisco, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But bridges, like that's, every other method is painful. So, and that's why bridges are a popular way for people to kill themselves. That is kind of strange.
I would argue that jumping off of something to die would be painful, if only emotionally painful.
Oh, because
those seconds or milliseconds it took for you to hit the concrete like
that
water.
A lot of people who survived that changed their mind midair.
Yeah.
So that's horrible.
So speaking of jumping to kill yourself, in March of 1937, Grace E. Magro fell from a 9th-story window, which isn't that high up. Her fall was broken by telephone wires which were wrapped around her body. She did initially survive the fall, but then she later died at the hospital. Police were unable to determine whether her death was a suicide or an accident. 9th story, that's not that far. What was she thinking?
Well, you pretty much are compromised emotionally.
Obviously.
When you want to commit suicide. So
then 2 years later, in May of 1939, a Navy officer, Irwin C. Neblett, was found dead in his room after also ingesting poison. No note. Dorothy Seeger, a teacher registered under the pseudonym Evelyn Evelyn Brent in January 1940. On the 10th of that month, she ingested poison while at the Cecil and was reported by the Los Angeles Times to be near death. But beforehand, she'd sent her relatives a note indicating she was going to die. She was going to end her life. She eventually did die from the poisoning on January 12th. So 2 days later. So I found 9 more cases of apparent suicide.
Uh-huh.
I also found that there had been a serial killer who'd stayed there.
Wow.
And a woman who was later murdered, Black Dahlia. You've probably heard of that.
Sounds familiar.
So none of those events are related. None of these. None of them are related. The people don't know each other. The serial killer didn't kill the lady.
Maybe they're copycats. One person did it, increases likelihood more people do it.
Well, that is a point well taken.
Because they know.
Yeah.
You know.
That is a point well taken.
Like the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, copycats
it became a thing.
Yeah. And then there's this one. This one that really, really just, this almost seemed like it's like modern day bullshit. In September of 1944, so it's obviously not modern day, 19-year-old Dorothy Jean Purcell was sharing a room at the Cecil with her boyfriend, Ben Levine, who was 38, and he was a shoe salesman. God, he might even still, no, he wouldn't be alive. He wouldn't. He'd be 120 years old. He wouldn't be alive. Purcell, who had apparently been unaware that she was pregnant, went into labor. She later testified in court that she didn't want to disrupt her boyfriend, so she went to the bathroom and gave birth to a baby boy. Then she thought the baby was dead, so she threw him out the window, and he landed on the roof of an adjacent building where he died.
Wow.
She was charged with murder, but 3 psychiatrists testified that she was mentally confused at the time of the incident. I think she was confused from birth to have done such a bizarre thing.
Yeah, it sounds like something weird's going on there.
I've watched a lot of those I didn't know I was pregnant videos.
Mm-hmm.
And those women seem initially, right after the baby comes out, like, what just frickin' happened? But they aren't so confused they lose all touch with reality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that just is way out there. But there was recently a case where a girl, I think she was 18, but she was still in high school, had a stomach ache. Her mom took her to the hospital. She was in a room. She said she had to go to the bathroom. She got up and ran to a bathroom where she pushed out a baby and then hid it in the trash can and put trash over it and came back out. And somebody from the hospital went in there, found the dead baby who had not been dead when he was born, and confronted her. And I think it's still going through court, but she said she didn't know what to do. She thought it was dead, so she just put it in the trash. That's crazy. But is it crazy because you're mentally confused, or is it crazy just because it's insane and nuts to kill your own kid? Anyway.
I think people also look for opportunities to not create what they perceive as a problem. And that might completely override, the moment, that might completely override everything else.
Okay, so all of those stories aside, this next one is probably the most well-known because it's so bizarre and horrific. And I know you've heard of it. So let me tell you about the background of this lady. Alyssa Lam was the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong, and she was a student at the University of British Columbia. In mid-2010, Alyssa began a blog named Ether Fields on Blogspot, and over the next 2 years, she was posting pictures of models in fashionable clothing, and as well as accounts of her own life, particularly her struggle with mental illness. In a January 2012 blog post, she lamented that a relapse at the start of her current school term had forced her to drop several classes, and so she felt utterly directionless and lost. She was worried that transcript showing so many withdrawals would result in her being unable to continue her studies and attend graduate school. And she was really, really out there about this. You know, it was really very public, a public display of what was going on in her life. So a little over 2 years after she'd started blogging, she announced that she was going to just quit that blog, and she started another one on Tumblr called Nouvelle Nouveau. And it was also fashion photos, quotes, and a few posts in her own words. So she was continuing on with that. And I think that it was probably pretty apparent to anyone who was following her blog posts, and certainly to her family, that she was mentally suffering. Something was wrong. Something serious was wrong. So it turned out she'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. She was on several medications, but her family said she had no history of suicidal ideations or attempts. She oftentimes would go off her meds, but, she was not suicidal in any way, shape, or form as far as they could tell. When she'd go off her meds, sometimes she did suffer hallucinations, but what she'd do when that happened is she'd hide under her bed. And
that's strange.
Yeah. And she was hospitalized at least once for one of these episodes. In keeping all of that in mind, so that was started in 2010. She started that blog post. So just 3 years later, after very publicly having breakdowns and, the highs and lows of mental illness, very publicly, she announced she was going to take a trip to California. It seems like it was a particularly bad idea, but she was an adult, so I don't know if there's anything anyone could have done to stop her. So off she went. She traveled alone on Amtrak and intercity buses. She visited the San Diego Zoo. She posted photos there on social media. By January 26th, she arrived in Los Angeles, and she spent about 2 days there before she checked into the Cecil Hotel. Now, I wonder what her thinking was to check into the Cecil. Was it because of finances? Because this is not a nice hotel now. Or was she attracted to it in some way? Nothing that I could see explained why she would check into the Cecil Hotel, a seedy hotel in the midst of 10,000 homeless people, drug addicts, and prostitutes.
She knew its history, maybe?
I don't know.
It had a history at that point, right?
Yeah, definitely. People were already calling
it was well known.
The suicide.
And on top of being well known, it's cheap, right?
Yeah. Well, relatively speaking. Yeah. Initially, she was given a shared room, which is very strange to me. So that sounds more like a hostel than a hotel, a shared room. But she was so disturbed her roommate that the roommate went to the management and said, "You got to get this chick out of here. I don't want her in my room." And so they moved her to a private room. The manager of the hotel said she was leaving notes for her roommate that said, "Go home and go away." She'd lock the door to the room and then demand that they give her a password before she'd let them in.
Wow.
Yeah. So, this was not good. So everybody there was kind of like, well, this chick's weird, but, whatever. I mean, it's all relative. And if you're living in, your business is in that kind of a neighborhood, I would guess they probably chalked it up to she's on drugs. I would guess so. So 2 days before she disappeared, she attended a live taping of Conan in Burbank, Conan being a talk show, evening talk show. But they escorted her off the premises because she was so disruptive.
Wow. It's weird because she's going to the places, but then she's like having a mental breakdown when she goes to the places.
And through this whole time, she'd been contacting her parents every single day to check in, to make sure they knew she was okay, until the day she disappeared. January 31st, end of contact. She was supposed to check out of the hotel that day and head home, but she didn't call her family, and so they didn't know what was going on, so they called the LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department. The hotel staff was questioned, and they said they'd seen her that day, but she was alone. Outside the hotel, a lady who owned a bookstore nearby called the Last Bookstore, she was the only person who'd actually talked to her that day, and she said she was very outgoing, very lively and friendly. She was getting gifts to take home to her family. She'd gotten some particular book, and and was wondering out loud whether it was too heavy for her to carry the whole way home, because she was traveling by bus, or train and bus. So, obviously she's carrying her crap on her back, probably on a backpack. Police searched the hotel to the extent that they legally could. They searched her room and had dogs go through the building, including the rooftop, but the dogs were unsuccessful in detecting her scent. But the cops said they didn't search every room because they didn't have probable cause to believe that a crime had been committed. They just, it was a missing person case, so they couldn't go in all the rooms. They probably knocked on doors and said, "Can we look in your room?" And people said yes, or people said no. And because of the neighborhood, there were probably a lot of people who said no. They're up to no good in there. A week later, the police decided they needed more help, and so they made flyers and put them out all over the neighborhood and online, and that's what brought the case to the public's attention. So now media is paying attention. On February 13th, after another week with no sign of Alyssa, the LAPD released a video of the last known sighting of her, which was taken in one of the elevators in the hotel by like a video surveillance camera. And that was taken on January 31st, so the day she disappeared. So do you want to look at that?
I think I've seen it.
I'm going to play it just to refresh your memory.
She's acting weird and she goes in the elevator.
So there's no sound involved in it.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
So she walks in, she starts punching these buttons, and she's looking very intently at them. She's standing there. She looks a little nervous or a little stressed. Her hands look like they might be clenched at her sides. But then the door doesn't close. Why doesn't the door close? So she looks out like, what the heck? Why isn't the door closing? And that made her nervous, and now she's kind of freaked out. The door is not closing. Why is not the door closing? Now she's probably terrified, thinking somebody's out there, especially because she's mentally ill. So she looks out
Clearly.
again. Nobody's out there. Again, why has not this door attempted to close? We're already into it. I don't know. I can't see the time thing. So she goes out into the hallway, jumps out there real quick, thinking she's going to catch somebody. Nobody's out there. Steps back in the elevator. The door is still not closing.
It's almost like she's acting goofy. I mean, how she's moving.
Yeah. It's almost kind of exaggerated. And standing in the hallway, looking, the door is not closing. Why would that door not close? That seems
because she
weird.
Pressed maybe all of the buttons.
Even if you press all the buttons, I've been in enough elevators to know that even if you press them all, and I have done that, I'm in frustration and irritation, and they don't just stay open. And then she goes back in.
She may have pressed.
Now she looks very, very concerned. She kind of held her breath. Now she's pressing all the buttons. She's trying to get the door to close. She's trying to get it to go somewhere. She doesn't know what the hell's going on.
Is she? Maybe she's just pressing all the buttons because she wants to press. You know what I mean? And she could have pressed a button that was the door shut button. Like the
maybe,
keep the door open button or whatever.
Oh, maybe. That could be. Now this is weird. Is she talking to somebody? Is she having an hallucination? It looks like her hands are dancing in the air.
I don't know. It kind of looks like drugs to me.
And then she's doing something else weird, like she's pointing or counting or something with her hands. This is not a good situation. She doesn't look okay. And it goes on for a few more minutes, and that was the extent of it, and there's no sound with it. So there's no sound with that video. So who the heck knows if she was saying something, what she was saying, if she was talking to something she saw, who knows?
So is the implication here that she felt she was being followed by someone or something, and she was trying to get the elevator to get away from that?
That's okay.
Is that the implication?
So that's what I think maybe was going on in her mind. But because she's mentally ill, she's not doing it logically.
It really looks like she was on drugs. Not just like, okay, so she was depressed, right?
And she had bipolar.
So she's probably on like SSRIs or something.
Right.
If she took a drug, certain drugs can cause what's called serotonin syndrome. Mm-hmm. I can't really remember exactly what happens when you have that, but the interaction between drugs for depression, bipolar disorder, antipsychotics, and recreational drugs can be really bad. And beyond that, if you're taking recreational drugs, it can be bad just on its own, you know. Like, I've seen videos, I think it's bath salts. Maybe it's called, I think they're called PCP.
I don't know.
Maybe, I might be wrong about that. Anyway, that's the one, like, Florida man eats man's face.
The face, yeah. The zombie drug.
They totally act completely psychotic. Obviously, they are completely psychotic. If you go to a seedy place, a seedy part of a big city, which is associated with drugs, and you get drugs, I mean, you know.
Can you concede, though, that there may be some residual energy of all those sad, horrible people killing themselves that may have made it worse for her?
So, if there was, okay, actually, there's two parts to that. One, just the hotel itself and the story behind it might make you depressed or feel depressed emotionally. So there's a residual energy. It's the knowledge of this grim hotel. But two, if there's things possible like what do people like, echoes or whatever, quote unquote, echoes of events in the past, whatever, then clearly that could conceivably be possible, you know. So like a person gets really sad in their hotel room, then later, by association, by proximity conceptually to that previous event, you then experience being sad in the hotel room.
I know I've gone into places before, just, and apropos of nothing, felt like, oh my God, this is
and it wasn't really related to the aesthetics.
No. And then find out later that, you know, a very sad event had occurred there. In fact, I can think of one place in particular. It was after our house burned down, and our real estate agent was taking me and Christina around to look at properties to buy a house to replace the house that had burned down. And we went to one house which actually would have been ideal. It had 2 stories upstairs, and then it had a basement, walkout basement down below, and there were plenty of bedrooms for everybody. And in the back of the walkout basement, so there were bedrooms with windows, but there was another room towards the underground portion. And I don't know what it was, but I walked in that room and it was almost like suffocating. It was so horrible. And I just turned around and walked out. And I think Christina had a similar reaction to the house. It's like, this house should have been ideal. It was in our town. It was close to where we needed to be. It was enough room for everybody. It was within the price range. It was actually a beautiful house at a lake view, but it was not okay. And so we got into the real estate agent's car, and then as she's driving away, she said, well, in the spirit of full disclosure, I have to tell you that the kid who lived here before, a teenage boy lived there before, and he killed himself in that little room downstairs. There was nothing, you know, obviously they've cleaned this house up. They've staged it to sell. There's nothing there that's going to indicate that somebody offed themselves. And I wasn't connected enough to that community to have heard any sort of story like that. So I do think that something remains of the activities that have taken place. You know, there are people who go to battlefields and, okay, yeah, they knew it was a battlefield, but they get very strong impressions of things that had occurred there. So I think that there might be something to that, and maybe she was picking up on some of that. And like you say, point taken, maybe it's just the knowledge that this place is called the Suicide. Lots of people.
I mean, certainly that's also going to affect you, and regardless if there's some other exotic phenomenon going on. And
I would guess that even just walking outside the door, if there are 10,000 homeless people living within a short distance of that hotel, there's going to be a certain feel to that neighborhood that is not going to be really jolly. So people have had a lot to say about her behavior in that elevator. Some people thought she's having a psychotic episode, you know, and that could be it. And that's probably true. Others thought someone was actually after her. And maybe they're, you know, just because you're crazy doesn't mean that bad things can't happen to you.
It could be it could be all of the above. Let's
Yes.
say she knows about the thing, it's making her sad. There's a ghost haunting her, projecting its negative energy into her brain.
Which is causing her to
and
have
she's on drugs,
yeah.
and she's having a natural
It
psychotic
could have been all
break.
kinds of things. So, and then there were those people who thought she was seeing ghosts.
Uh-huh.
So,
Even if there's a ghost following her or whatever, she's acting like not how you would expect somebody to act. So there's also more than that, you know?
that's true. Because I'll tell you, if I got in an elevator and I thought there was a ghost outside,
I wouldn't
shut the doors.
like hop out, hop back in, hop out like
and if
a kid.
I hopped out and didn't see anything, I'd take off running and screaming. So, just saying. All right, so this is the gross part. Here we get to the really gross part. So, during the search for Alyssa Lam, guests at the hotel began complaining about low water pressure. And some of them said the water that was coming out of the taps in their rooms was colored, like dark, and had an unusual taste. This almost makes me want to puke, I tell you. Because of those complaints, and it was because of those complaints, because remember, the police have been throughout that entire hotel, except for the rooms. They've been through all the common areas. They've been on the roof. They've looked in the elevators. They've looked at the fire escapes. They've done all that stuff. Because of those complaints, on February 19th, a hotel maintenance worker went up to the roof to see if there was a problem with any of the 4 1,000-gallon tanks located on the roof. Now, putting it into perspective, I don't know if you remember our water tank out in Dolan Springs in Arizona, but it was a 500-gallon water tank, and it wasn't really that humongous. It was probably as long as the sofa, maybe 3 feet high, maybe 4 feet wide.
Yeah, okay.
It was,
and it's on like a little...
Yeah, it was on a little trailer.
Oh, okay.
So a 1,000-gallon tank, twice that size. We're not talking about a huge tank. We're not talking about, there was a show when I was a kid, Petticoat Junction, where they had these huge water tanks and the girls would go swimming in their scantily clad clothes in these water tanks.
They must be smaller than the ones they have like in New York.
Yes, much smaller. 1,000-gallon water tank.
I guess if you think like 1 gallon jug of water, just not big.
What is it, like a cubic foot? Not even a cubic foot. I'm going to look it up how many square feet 1,000 gallons
That's still not
is.
that big though.
It's bigger than I would think. So just hang on. So 10 by 10 by 10.
It's 10 by 10 by 10 off.
Duh. I don't know why we're making it so complicated. Okay, 10 by 10 by 10. A 10 by 10 by 10 cube. And there were 4 of these tanks on the roof. They provided water to all the guest rooms, a kitchen,
Plus shower?
and a coffee shop. Well, if you think it's a hotel, it's going to have a shower, a toilet, and a sink
In each room.
in each room.
Yeah.
And then there's a kitchen to the dining room, and there's a coffee shop.
So do they pump water up to the things? Like fill them up?
Probably. And then that provides the
Constantly?
pressure. I don't know, but it
I wonder why they do that.
I don't know.
I mean, it makes sense to provide the pressure,
They probably
but is it
don't anymore.
to provide consistent pressure?
Maybe. I don't know. So the guy goes up there and he opens up a hatch okay, there's some conflicting information. Some people say he opened up the hatch on one of the tanks. I mean, he probably opened up the hatches on all of the tanks, but who knows if it was the
Good thing
first
they have
tank,
hatches.
first hatch or whatever.
You've heard of the ones without hatches, right?
No.
Yeah, they're just open to the air.
Oh, yeah. I thought you meant like it were completely sealed up. Okay, so some people say the hatches on 2 of the tanks were already open. Some
That's
people
gross.
say that the hatches were all closed and he opened up hatches. So in any case, he looked through an open hatch and saw Alyssa lying face up in the water.
Rotten.
Oh, yeah. So the tank was drained.
He saw a corpse.
He saw a corpse, a bloated, green, naked corpse lying face up in the water.
Not like a recognizable person.
Now, it's 10 by 10 by 10. How do you get up to the top of a 10-foot thing? You need a ladder, right? He had to bring a ladder over to look into that hatch. There was no ladder up there.
Climbed it?
He
It's
brought
smooth?
Yes, he brought a ladder over and looked in the hatch. They drained the tank. They had to cut it open, probably with some kind of torch, to get her out because the hatch wasn't big enough for them to get her out. Probably they didn't want to disturb more evidence or whatever. I would guess they probably also, when they drained it, they had to capture that water to be able to assess what was in the water. Mm-hmm. It just sounds absolutely horrendous. I would not have wanted to be a cop, a homicide cop during that. Too gross. So the LA coroner's office issued a finding of accidental drowning with bipolar disorder as a significant factor. The full coroner's report said that Alyssa's body had been found naked. Her clothes were in the tank with her, and they were floating in the water and coated with a sand-like particulate.
That's weird.
So what was the sand-like particulate? I don't know.
Well, if she had been somewhere where...
She'd been down on the street just a little while before that, having a conversation with a lady about a book.
Beach in town.
A beach... Okay, you're in downtown LA to go to the beach, and you're traveling by bus, would probably take a long, long time. If
she did that, came rolling around on the beach...
But why wouldn't they just say sand then? Why would they say like a sand-like particulate? Why wouldn't they just say sand? Her watch and a room key were also in there. She was moderately decomposed, and there was no evidence of physical trauma or sexual assault or suicide.
Drugs.
Toxicology tests showed traces of the same prescription medication that had been found among her belongings, so the same thing she's supposed to be taking, plus some non-prescription drugs such as Sinutab and ibuprofen.
Sinutab? I've never heard of that.
It's just for sinus pain.
Oh,
There was a very small quantity of alcohol in her blood that was like 0.02%. So that was insignificant. There were no recreational drugs. None. Zilch. So there goes your theory about drugs out there. Investigators...
Presuming it's something that you could find with a toxicology test.
Investigators and experts say that the concentration of her prescription drugs in her system seemed to indicate that she had been under-medicating or maybe had even stopped taking her medications altogether. So, psychotic break sounds likely. It does. But here's where it gets weird. I mean, that's all weird. Oh, every last freaking bit of that is weird. Mm-hmm. Weird and bizarre and horrifying. And
you mean every last bit as in she climbed up to the thing, she was naked,
the elevator thing and her going into the TV studio and acting disruptive and giving those people notes and demanding they say passwords. I mean, it's just sad and horrible. But although they had determined how she died, they didn't offer any explanation of how she got in the tank. The doors and stairs that access the hotel's roof are locked and were locked, and only the staff has passcodes and keys. Any attempt to force them would have triggered an alarm. No alarm had gone off. The fire escape could have allowed her to bypass those security measures, but remember those dogs? They'd never found a scent trail on them.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody said that they believed that the hotel's roof was easily accessible by the fire escape and that the water tanks were open. But even all of that, how did she get in the water tank? There was no ladder pulled up to a water tank.
Up there?
The water tanks were, and here it even says how big they are, so we didn't even have to do that. They're 4 feet by 8 foot cylinders, and they're propped up on concrete blocks. There was no access to them, and workers had to use a ladder to look at the water.
8 feet, though.
They had heavy lids that would be difficult to replace from within. So police dogs that searched through the hotel for Alyssa also searched the roof.
And it was open? Or the hatch was closed?
Well, there have been reports that say it was open, and there have been reports that say they were closed. So, don't know.
The guy who went up initially would have been the one.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Those dogs that searched there for her scent, they went up on the roof, and they were searching like right after she was reported missing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe not the 31st of January, maybe the 1st of February, but within days, very easily within days. And obviously this isn't a place where lots of people can go up on the roof. It's restricted. And they didn't find any trace of her up there, any scent of her.
So presumably the dog would have either smelled decomposition or...
They'd smelled her. If she walked up to a tank, okay, let's just say she walked up to the tank, she pulled a ladder up, she climbed up and jumped in and took off all her clothes, and who knows what the particulate matter was. Okay, whatever.
And then someone moved the ladder.
And then someone moved the ladder and closed the hatch. Okay, all right, I'll go for that. But it still doesn't explain why the dogs didn't get her scent. The other part of it is there's no evidence that they haven't released any conclusion on the results of a rape kit or a fingernail kit, or even they were even processed. So was she raped? Did she have, like she scratched somebody beforehand? Don't know. So she had some unusual bloating, but the pathologist just thought it had to do with the body's decomposition and the fact that she was in water. So they just said it was an accidental death. It was an accidental death. Or it was suicide.
Accidentally killing yourself on purpose.
Her cause of death was drowning. Her manner of death was inconclusive, because they said it could be suicide or it could have been just an accident. So her cause of death was drowning. Drowning killed her. But the manner, what brought those events about, they never concluded. They never came to a conclusion.
And the implication here is that it's the hotel.
Okay, so just wait a minute. After her death, remember I talked about those blogs she had? Her Tumblr blog was updated, presumably through Tumblr's Q option that allows you to automatically update your posts from your phone when the user is away. So it's, maybe she had a queue and she had blog posts established to be uploaded. But her phone wasn't found with her body or in her hotel room.
No one ever found the phone?
Mm-mm. And the continued updates, because they continued, were they facilitated by the theft of her phone, a hacker, or through the queue? Nobody knows. So they don't know if those updates were related to her death either. So in a nutshell, no pun intended, nutshell. Oh God, that's awful.
Oh.
Alyssa had severe mental health challenges. She took off from Canada, went to a hotel called the Suicide in LA. There she acted strange and then disappeared. She was discovered drowned in a tank of water on a roof that was nearly impossible to reach without a key, in a tank that would have required a ladder to get into. There's just so much weird stuff about that. It's just so bizarre. But I guess it's possible. Now, there have been a lot of movies that they've used that situation to incorporate into movies and storylines. So because it's just so weird. It's just so unlikely and weird that this perfect storm of strange circumstances came together and this poor girl died in a water tank after people drank her decomposing
That
fluids.
is pretty horrible.
But I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. I'm going to tell one more story, and it's not as long as that. So this one is from Reddit. A lady called VKLC posted her story. She's a petite 21-year-old woman. She went to the hotel. Why, I can't imagine, but she said it was weird. And the
hotel itself was weird? Or her experience was weird?
Her experience was weird. She said the staff was great. The cleaning crews didn't really talk to her, but really honestly, they probably couldn't speak English, so I don't think that's weird. So the first weird thing that happened, she was in bed at about 11 o'clock at night. She was laying on the bed watching TV, and she heard a thumping noise in the bathroom, and she went in to investigate. She didn't hear anything. She went in there, stood there for a couple minutes, didn't hear anything, and then she heard a creak and another thump, and she could tell it was coming from the pipes under the sink. So she turned on the faucet to make sure the water, the sink was working, and nothing came out. So she called the front desk, and she started to explain that she'd heard this thumping and this creak, and now no water comes out of her sink. And while she was talking to them, she hears another thump And then she must have left the faucet on because then water starts coming out. So she said, never mind, it's all right. So she walked in there to turn off the water, and the water coming out is a sickly gray color.
Is this after the...
Oh, yeah, this is
more or less recently?
Yeah, it's very recently. So she turned it off and then turned it back on, and the water came out normally. And then she was able to fall asleep quickly. I would not be able to fall asleep quickly.
Yeah, that would fuck me up.
I mean, obviously she knew the story behind this because she went to stay there, specifically that hotel, because she likes weird things. That is very strange that she was able to fall asleep quickly. She woke up exactly at 1:38 a.m. to someone knocking at her door. And she looked through the peephole and saw a middle-aged man, and he was looking down. She said he looked harmless, so she opened the door. Now, why would you do that? What is wrong with this girl? She's from Minnesota. She said it was because of Minnesota Nice. Come on, Minnesota Nice? That must be Minnesota Stupid, because that doesn't make any sense to me at all.
You probably shouldn't open your door to random people.
In the middle of the night in a hotel that's known for weird stuff, and it's got 10,000 homeless people outside. Yeah. So she said...
But now, all that said, stupid doesn't necessarily mean you're doing anything wrong.
Right. So she asked the guy if he needed, could she help him? And he said, I need help. And she said, are you hurt? Can I call someone? And then he just stared at her. And then he grabbed her arm, pulled her into the hallway, and ran into her room and shut the door and locked it. So now she's in the hallway. So she went down to the lobby and told them what happened, and they apologized, and they said they had to deal with a lot of strange characters there.
I'll say.
Yeah. And they got security to go up, and they got the door open.
And he wasn't there.
And, oh no, he was there. He was in the bathroom. He'd cut his wrists. I don't know whether it was with a knife. I can't remember whether it was a knife or a razor. Let me look. Oh, it was a razor. So he'd cut his wrists and was holding them under the sink, repeating something about cleansing himself and this hotel. And she's standing there next to the security people. Why would you be standing there? I mean, gawking? I would let the security people handle this. But because she's standing right there, he reaches out, grabs her, and cuts her with the razor. So they call 911, and he gets taken to the hospital. And she didn't do anything. She said it was just a surface cut.
And then she went to sleep?
Are you in? No, they gave her another room and a refund. Okay, has she not heard of AIDS?
Yeah.
She's in a place where people are known to use drugs, and there are prostitutes, and a guy comes in and cuts himself, and it's blood on the razor, and he cuts her. This woman, I just can't even imagine what was going through her mind.
Well, again.
Okay, so why do so many suicides occur at the Cecil? Consider,
maybe that middle-aged guy was cleansing the hotel, and that was the ritual to get rid of the spirit or whatever.
Okay, you don't really believe that. You're just humoring me.
Of course I know. And I don't necessarily believe that the place is haunted.
Okay, can you just for one moment imagine that? Just humor me for one moment. That there is some imprint on that hotel. Maybe it was built on an Indian sacred ground, or maybe the people who built it are just horrible people.
There is some malevolent phenomena thing that is attached to the place.
Yes. That when people who are emotionally fragile or mentally unstable go there, they're more likely than not to have worse symptoms. You know, these are remarkably bizarre ways to kill yourself. Remarkably bizarre. Poison capsules, slicing your own throat with a razor. What?
I get the sense
climbing
those were
into
more
a water
likely
tank
in the past. The climbing in a water tank thing is crazy. But she was crazy. Not even just, like, before she went there, people were saying she was crazy. True. And this lady, the guy could have been on serious drugs. She never determined.
And she didn't press charges.
And they didn't tell her.
No.
the info they got.
No.
So yeah, he could have been on drugs. It's like if you went to Florida and you found a highway and it's the weird highway, and there's people who every once in a while eat people's faces on this highway. That's weird. It's because of bath salts. They're smoking drugs and they're getting really high and they're doing crazy shit. And there's probably drugs there. And that in and of itself doesn't matter. It's that drugs cause people to act crazy.
So you don't think there's any relationship between the hotel itself and the fact that so many people have killed themselves there?
So one interesting thing, you won't probably hear it passively. You'd have to look for this information, but it very well could be that every hotel in that area, has similar stuff happen.
Yeah, point.
Not as bad, but people kill themselves, people take drugs and act weird.
I wonder if there's a relationship between the cost of a hotel room and the likelihood of a crime or suicide occurring.
I have to imagine that the more it costs, the less
likely
there are going to be actual, like, hard crimes. Not like prostitution. That probably happens even if you go to, like, multi-billion dollar hotels.
The whores just cost more.
And it's not a hard crime. Now, murder, that almost certainly goes down as you go up in cost, right? Unless it's like the mob owns the place.
So maybe the dark force is simply poverty. Except that doesn't really explain in the early years when it was still a thriving hotel that was not like a dump.
Consider, perhaps it was an expensive hotel, but it was not a nice hotel. Like, there are hotels and hotel chains that the owners are essentially con artists. The place is not classy at all, even though it's expensive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's true. But this place seems like, what they described is marble and alabaster and stained glass and ferns and I don't know.
If it was a classy place, if the owners were acting good faith, they weren't scumbags, it was not like from the get-go a corrupt place. You can't necessarily determine that because of their aesthetic choices.
Yeah, and I do think that there's a lot of information that has been lost to time because the way they wrote newspaper articles in the 30s and 40s and 50s and even in the 60s was way different than the way they write them now. And also just the sheer volume of information that we have now was not available back then.
Okay, here's one. If the hotel wasn't classy, does that increase or decrease the likelihood that there's a malevolent spirit attached to the place? You know what I mean? Like, for instance, say it's a classy place versus a not classy place, and someone kills themselves, and then their spirit haunts the place and causes other people to kill themselves. Is it more likely that the nice, brightly lit place is going to get haunted, or the grungy, dungeon-like, cheap, shitty place?
I get where you're going, but another thing to consider is aesthetics affects how people view someplace.
Yeah.
So
including when you are ignoring paranormal stuff at all. So, like, if somebody goes into a grungy, dungeon-like, horrible place, that's going to affect them, and they're probably going to think that, or more likely to think that it's haunted or something.
Yeah.
Just because of the association, even if there's no haunting.
Yeah, so grungy doesn't necessarily come into it when you consider that an old mansion that might be very beautiful, very well appointed. People are more likely to think of it as haunted and be freaked out by it than if it was a modern, ultra slick place.
Consider assuming hauntings, quote unquote, are real. That's a real thing. That no one, not a single person, has any idea how it works.
Sure.
Presumably.
Well, I mean, they have ideas, but they
Yeah.
don't know for sure.
So it could actually be the aesthetic factors that cause the apparent haunting. You know? So like a haunted house looking house, the people there are like telekinetically making the haunting or whatever.
Okay, yeah, it just kind of came to me that and we know aesthetics affect people on so many different levels.
Yeah.
Sound, smells, vision, everything. Affects you completely. So yeah, what if it's the power within the person that actually creates
Considering that, at this hotel, you know, I don't think, I mean, so the classic way of looking at it is one person kills themselves and then they're haunting the place, right? It's always about this person is haunting the place. Okay, it's a Native American or something. It's the burial grounds. All the natives, crazy demon spirits are haunting the place or whatever. It actually still doesn't really explain why somebody would go crazy.
Right.
Now, you know what would explain someone going crazy? They're already crazy.
Okay. The questions I have about the Cecil, I don't think there are answers available because I don't know. But I do know this. I would not stay there. I would not. No way. I would maybe go in the lobby, but I don't think I'd want to venture beyond the lobby.
That is the problem. Let's say you don't believe it's haunted. You're making the wager, however likely or unlikely it is, that there's no such thing as hauntings. If you're wrong about that,
Yeah.
then you might accidentally
Okay, it's for the same
Ghost
reason
yourself.
that I'm not ever going to consume or however you get bath salts in your body. I
think
might
they
be one of
smoke
those. I might be one of those people who go nuts and eat off somebody's face.
Yeah. People who are convinced that it's haunted and are convinced they're being affected by it. And they're so convinced that they just go along with it.
Maybe.
That is a thing. Like hypnosis, that's essentially how it works. People are suggestible, quote unquote. And so they'll do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. They're doing it. Like, you know, it's just like people filling a role where the role is, I'm the victim of a haunting, you know.
Yeah. So the questions I have, and if anybody has the answer, please put them in the comments below. How did she get in the water tank? How did she get to the roof? I'm talking about Alyssa Lam here. Would you stay at the Cecil? These are questions I love the answers to. Our contact information is in the show notes. You can email us, text us, or even call and leave a 3-minute voicemail. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you climb into a water tank.